Welcome on in to the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Back recording Wednesday, January 21st. A big day for college football, at least in the Big 12. The 2026 schedule was released earlier today throughout the Big 12 for all programs in the Big 12. And Utah now knows the path that they have to travel in 2026. I'll be recording later tonight with Josh Bennett for Thursday's episode. So looking forward to that. And we're going to go more in depth on Utah's schedule. So I'm going to hit on it a little bit here in this episode, but going to have a much deeper conversation with Bennett on Utah's schedule and how it stacks up, what we like about it, what we don't, what are our thoughts on it. So be looking forward to that tomorrow. But on today's episode, just going to do a quick little recap of Utah basketball dropping one last night against Kansas State on the road in Manhattan, 81-78. Going to break down what happened in the game and then also just some conversation about where we're at with Utah basketball. It's such a fascinating time covering this team, and I think there are good things happening, but I think also, some conversations that need to be had to keep expectations in check. And I think last night was, a tough one for Utah to lose. So let's just dive into it. Let's get into the conversation with Utah basketball. Obviously last night, losing essentially in the final seconds. They went back and forth with Kansas State for 40 minutes. Utah jumped out, got off to a good start. They went up 7-2, and then Kansas State went on a 13-2 run to take a 15-9 lead early in the first half to start the game. And that was essentially what set the stage for the rest of the contest. Just a good back and forth battle between Kansas State and Utah. Terrence Brown ended up being fantastic for Utah last night. He finished the game with 33 points on 14 of 24 shooting. Did a lot, did as much as he could to keep Utah in that one. Utah also had Seydou Traore and Don McHenry finish with 15 points apiece. Traore chipping in 6 rebounds. Actually, Don McHenry also grabbed 6 rebounds as well, and each of them also dished out 3 assists. So, a pretty good night from Seydou. It's, we can get into some of the decision making late in the game, but I thought overall this was a performance from Seydou Traore that was a positive. I thought he was a bright spot last night. Did some good things, obviously, for Utah throughout the game. Don McHenry, produced, but unfortunately missed on some opportunities late in the game as well that could have maybe changed the outcome in this one. But again, Terrence Brown was just everything Utah needed him to be, just not enough, as Utah also had to compete against the Wildcats, who were down a couple key players as well. But Dawes was listed as questionable on the availability report prior to the game, and you could tell that he was just extremely limited in the contest last night. Wasn't able to do a whole lot. He was just sort of out there, and he still grabbed 7 rebounds. The effort was there at times, but he just lacked the normal production that we typically see from Dawes, particularly as an offensive threat. He finished shot attempts, missing all 3, unfortunately. So a pretty rough night. And, that's unfortunate for Utah because this was a prime opportunity to steal a game on the road, but not being 100%, obviously missing already a couple of key players in Jacob Patrick and Lucas Longarita, it's so fascinating to call Lucas Longarita a key player already. We've only seen, I think, 3 minutes of action from him, but man, those 3 minutes were exciting. I think Longarita, he's expected to be back in a couple of weeks. I would anticipate probably the middle of February is what I was told, maybe even sooner than that, but they're going to be patient with him. They don't want to rush him back. But he is expected. The injury, I think, it was a 4-week time frame for his return. So we'll look forward to that. And then with Patrick, it sounds like it's a game to game type deal with him, but missing those two, and then not having Dawes at 100% last night and being limited like he was, just put Utah in a pretty deep hole and really required everybody else stepping up. And I thought Utah got, again, good production from Brown, Traore, and McHenry. But beyond that, even Josh Hayes stepped up with 9 points, a handful of rebounds, and did a lot more than he typically does. But outside of that, Utah finished with just 2 points and a couple of rebounds from James Okonkwo. Kendall Sanders, 0 points, 3 rebounds. Obamate Abbey finished with 4 points and 1 assist. And that was, that's tough. And so for Utah, this came down to the final minutes of this game. And Utah had, Utah had opportunities to get this one. They went back and forth for a full 40 minutes. And, coming down the stretch with about a minute left, the game was tied 77-77. Haggerty scored a jumper to give Kansas State a 79-77 lead with about 40 seconds left. Utah had an opportunity with Brown, but he missed a layup with about 24 seconds left. But Haggerty, who grabbed the rebound, threw it ahead to a player and ultimately threw it out of bounds with about 19 seconds left. So Utah down 2 with 19 left, had a chance to obviously tie or win. Kansas State ended up fouling Don McHenry, and he went to the line and split a pair of free throws, unfortunately. So obviously Kansas State up 79-78. Utah has to foul quickly. They foul with about 6 seconds left on the clock. They go to the line. They connect on both free throws, going up 81-78. Utah has to hurry with Brown getting into the front court, missing a 3-point attempt, and that was the final buzzer. So it came down to free throws, came down to a couple of empty possessions for Utah where they had multiple opportunities to get this one, but just unable to make the plays. And again, I think this team deserves a lot of credit. It's clear that they've improved over the course of the season, but this was an opportunity with Kansas State being not being 100%, having 2 key contributors out for the game. This was a prime opportunity for Utah to go into a Big 12 arena on the road and steal a game. And unfortunately, this was one that they had opportunities to seal it, but couldn't finish. And that was a tough one for Utah last night. So, as encouraging as it has been, understanding the big picture of what Utah is this season, right? That was a really, I think, in my opinion, a bad loss. And I think with Utah just not doing the little things they need to, converting on free throws. Don McHenry is an 80% free throw shooter on the season. He goes 2 for 5 from the charity stripe in the game. Utah finished 6 of 10 from the line overall. Only 10 free throw attempts in the game last night for Utah. I think that was a big issue. And it's not that they weren't aggressive. They were getting the line. They just weren't getting the whistle. But again, had opportunities at the line. They missed on a couple of easy ones. This was a game where if you make a couple of defensive stops, especially in that first half, Kansas State opened the game connecting on, I shouldn't say open the game, but in the first half alone, Kansas State hit 10 3-pointers in the game. And that sort of set the tone. It was Don Castillo, and let me pull up the other guy that really did a number on Utah. David Castillo and Nate Johnson, both of whom combined 9 of 14 from 3-point range. So you have 2 players that are just going bananas in the first half. I don't think they hit let me see here. Yeah, in the second half, David Castillo and Nate Johnson combined to go 1 of 3 from 3-point range. So in the first half alone, those two combined to go 8 of 11 from 3-point range, scoring 17 points in the first half for David Castillo and 15 points for Nate Johnson. That allowed PJ Haggerty, who is just a fantastic scorer, to control and dictate things on the offensive end in the second half for Kansas State. He finished with 28 points in the second half alone on 12 of 18 shooting, which included 3 of 6 from the charity stripe, for himself. So tough night for Utah on the defensive end, and that's been the issue for Utah all season. I was looking up some numbers, and their defensive rating has actually been really consistent. When you look at what it's been throughout the year, it is a perfectly paralleled 9 to the ground. It has not budged. Whereas the offensive efficiency and the offensive rating has actually improved over the course of the season. So we're seeing improvement. It's not happening on the defensive end of the floor, which is for most of these games, most of these results that end up going the other way for Utah. It comes down to what they do on the defensive side of the floor, which is tough. So, in my opinion, beyond the defense and not being able to stop PJ Haggerty, to me, I think the late game stuff was, a bit execution, but also I think in terms of just the second half in general, I think Utah executed well. I think Terrence Brown did as much as he could, but Utah just clearly lacks options beyond, Brown, McHenry, who often have to create their own scoring looks off the dribble. And I think that's a problem. And with Dawes being as limited as he was, I think that just made it that much tougher on Utah, who is already down, options. You need depth. You need guys that are reliable in the Big 12. You need your stars to carry the weight, but you need reliable options around them. And I think that is what Utah is lacking right now is the depth. I think they've got, a good core of players that are on par, with the majority of the Big 12, right? But it's once you get past the top 4, there's a big drop off in terms of ability and consistency. And I think that is what Utah is missing. And now, look, like with Jacob Patrick being out, with Lucas Longarita, I do think those two players in particular can be difference makers for Utah, especially in a game like this, where it's just a back and forth, offensive fest. I think that is where those two players can help Utah significantly. Utah just needs somebody that can make good decisions with the ball, that can create for others consistently, and then can also, they need guys that can obviously knock down shots consistently. I think Patrick has shown that he can be a really reliable floor spacer. He's consistent with his shot from deep. And then Lucas Longarita, there's a lot of excitement around him because he can be sort of that bigger guard who can create and facilitate for others, which would allow Terrence Brown to play a little bit more off the ball, which would allow him to focus on scoring, which would allow Don McHenry to also do the same. I think if you can get Longarita back here in the near future, like I said, maybe a couple weeks out still, if you can get Patrick back, this team, it's trending in the right direction. And you add those two to this mix, I think it can become a dangerous squad the rest of the way. Obviously, we know that Utah is fighting an uphill battle this season, but I think there's room for Utah to continue to improve, to continue to put on a good show offensively. How much progress can they make defensively will really kind of determine how effective they can be as you get into the final weeks of the season and as you get into tournament play. Can you become that dangerous team where suddenly you're playing ball, your best ball at the right time? Can you get into the tournament and make some noise? I think that's going to be dictated by getting how quickly you can get Patrick and Longarita back, build that chemistry, and then how much buy-in, how much commitment, how much progress and improvement can you make on the defensive end of the floor. That's going to be the key for Utah. So this is a tough one. I would not call this a good loss for Utah. This was an opportunity to go into Manhattan and steal one. And they had multiple opportunities to put the game, I don't want to say put the game away, but at least take a lead and sort of preserve that cushion into the final seconds of the game, and just weren't able to either hit free throws, weren't able to create good scoring opportunities. And again, I think last night, getting down to those final couple of minutes, it was due to the fact that Brown had to do a lot of the heavy lifting. He had to create a lot on his own. There weren't a lot of options for Utah beyond Brown last night, and that made it tough. But again, if you get Patrick back sometime soon, if you get Longarita back here in the next couple of weeks, maybe that changes the dynamic offensively a little bit more, where you can compete. You have a few more options, you have a bit more balance across the floor, and maybe that creates some opportunities. But man, I just a game you had there for the taking, and just not able to take it. But again, this is a long process. This is a big picture season, right, for Utah basketball. And I think that's got to be the focus for Utah fans, right? I think it's really important for Utah fans to show up to the Huntsman Center, for these home games, because they do make a difference with this squad. They do impact games, and they do impact winning. I think they can help this team a lot. And you're going to need a couple of signature wins this season. And there's going to be opportunities the rest of the way for Utah with this squad to potentially, get an upset at home, potentially on the road. But I think that's going to be really key for Utah moving forward. So tough loss last night. Not a good loss by any means. This was one for the taking, and just weren't able to make the plays down the stretch, which was disappointing. But got to regroup. You've got Provo, you've got BYU coming up this weekend in Provo, and obviously we know that that's going to be a pretty daunting task for the Runyon Utes. But got a few days to prepare, to work out some things. Again, hopefully, maybe you can get Patrick back, maybe you can get Longarita back in a couple of weeks. Maybe that really helps bolster the squad down the home stretch over the final couple of weeks of the season. But yeah, progress being made, but not just giving away opportunities here. So plenty still to come for Utah basketball. I'll be talking with, we'll be recording with Andrew Crowley later this week for another episode where we'll go a little bit more in depth on this season, on potentially off-season roster construction as well. I think that's going to be really key for Utah moving forward. So we'll go ahead, switch gears here. Utah and the Big 12 released the 2026 schedules for football, and Utah's schedule came out kind of nice. Came out kind of nice. Let's run through it real quick. I think Utah's schedule, obviously, we knew the opponents, just kind of figuring out the sequencing of games and how they were going to shake up. Obviously, with the non-conference, Utah starts the season taking on the Idaho Vandals. Just sort of a tone setter here for Utah. This is one that you have the opportunity to play in front of the home crowd, to iron out some execution things, and then you get ready for your week 2 opponent, which is the Arkansas Razorbacks, traveling from Fayetteville to Salt Lake City. This is a big opportunity for Utah and the Big 12. I think Utah should be viewed as I don't want to say a comfortable favorite, but just knowing where Arkansas is at in the SEC and the changes that are being made in Fayetteville, this is going to be a tough test. I think Utah having Dan Pierre back and having that continuity, with him at the helm, I think is going to be really beneficial in this game specifically. This is an early one, a big contest early in the season with 2 programs that have new head coaches from who entered at the helm this past season. Obviously, Morgan Scalley taking over, and then Ryan Silverfield has taken over for Arkansas after, I think, 5 years with Memphis, where Memphis has had a lot of success over the last few years. They've been in that conversation for the top 25. They've been in the top 25 quite a bit under Silverfield's watch. So I'm fascinated to see that matchup. But again, that being at home, being in front of the Rice Eccles crowd, I think is going to be pretty valuable for Utah in this one. And then, you get past that one, you've got Utah State coming down to Salt Lake City. That one's going to be tough. Bronco Mendenhall in year 2 up there in Logan. We'll see how that one shakes out. And then Utah begins their Big 12 conference play, going on the road to Ames, Iowa, where they will open up Big 12 play against Iowa State on the road. Again, a new head coach here with Jimmy Rogers taking over the Cyclones after Matt Campbell left for Penn State. Jimmy Rogers, plenty familiar with the area up there in the Midwest. He coached at South Dakota State, where he actually led the program to an FCS national championship. So kind of familiar with the area. He was going to be the head coach of Washington State before Iowa State opened up. And I think this is going to be an interesting one, obviously with the massive turnover at Iowa State, with a lot of those Cyclones following Campbell to Penn State. This is a big transition year for the Cyclones. Still, obviously, with Utah going through their transition of their own, still have a lot in place. And so, like Utah's odds to go into Iowa State, open up Big 12 play with a win. After that, they have the bye week. And obviously, a week 5 bye week, it's not ideal. I think you would like it to at least be week 6, but you're not going to complain about a week 5 bye. I mean, you are, but but it's not the worst. It could be week 3. With week 5, that gives you Utah's going to have two really big games to kind of self-scout, self-evaluate, and get a better feel for what they're doing well, where they need to improve, because this next phase of the schedule is actually pretty tough. Obviously, this year, only one bye for Utah. And so this bye week in week 5, it's going to allow them to self-scout, self-evaluate, rest up, and then get ready for the next 7 weeks of the season. You'll welcome the Kansas Jayhawks to Rice-Eccles Stadium. And that's going to be an interesting one. Obviously, the Jayhawks going through a bit of transition as well. Not necessarily with the head coach, but a lot of personnel going to be changing there in Kansas. So that's going to be an interesting one. The Jayhawks, I think, making their first trip to Utah in quite some time. You'll go on the road to Boulder. And this one's going to be interesting, right? So Colorado not having as much success under Coach Prime, this past season. But, Coach Prime bringing in a lot of skill position talent. They've had to remake themselves in the trenches, losing Jordan Seaton to the transfer portal after it seemed like the video editing team was anticipating him coming back. But that's going to be a tough one because Utah absolutely embarrassed Colorado in Rice-Eccles Stadium. That Coach Prime probably isn't going to forget that one. So that's going to be a really fascinating game there in week 7 against Colorado, going on the road to Boulder. Then you return home where you're going to take on a Houston Cougars team and program under Willie Fritz that is on the rise. I've been really impressed with what Coach Fritz has done there in Houston. That's going to be a tough game. The Cougs coming off, I think, a 10-win season, 11-win season type of deal, coming off a bowl game victory over LSU. And, they return a lot of key pieces. They've added some talent, some significant talent as well, both from the high school ranks and the transfer portal. So that's going to be a tough game. This one I'm actually really excited for from a personal standpoint. Week, I think, 9, going on the road to Cincinnati. That was a game that I've long had circled on my calendar. I shouldn't say calendar, but just my wish list of road trips where I want to go, and going on the road to Cincinnati. I'm looking forward to that game. And then you get into week 9 and into the month of November. You've got BYU at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Don't really need to talk about that one. We know what it is with that. You go then on the road to Arizona, November in Tucson. Always a tough one. In Tucson. Then you go on the road to TCU. That's the first back-to-back roadie trip. Tucson and then Dallas-Fort Worth to take on the TCU Horned Frogs. Those 2 games I think are going to be really tough, especially coming off of the Holy War the week before the Arizona game. And then you finish up with West Virginia, which is going to be year 2 under Rich Rod, who's completely, again, remade that Mountaineer roster with the transfer portal and high school recruiting. So that team is going to look significantly different than it did this current season. So, again, going to record with Bennett later tonight. for tomorrow's episode, but wanted to get some quick thoughts up on this one. I think this schedule sets up well for Utah. Obviously, the 7 home games is a big deal. You've got most of your tough ones at home. You've got Arkansas, which again, Arkansas we know isn't the best SEC program, but still they've got SEC bodies, SEC depth, and that's going to be a big test. It always is, and that's going to be a big tone setter for Utah in week 2 of the season. Then you've got obviously other games at home: Houston, BYU. The toughest road games, obviously, being Arizona, TCU, and then again, that Colorado game is also going to be a fascinating one as well. So, more to come on Utah's 2026 schedule, but wanted to get a quick episode recorded for you guys. And just to let y'all know, we'll be back recording later tonight, me and Bennett, to for tomorrow's episode. So I'll go ahead, I'll wrap this one up. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. For myself, for the Utah Blockcast, signing off.